this, you have to have a card. At grocery stores, at pharmacies, you buy a book, you buy vitamins, you buy shower gel, you buy underwear. They go, you got your card? You don't have our card? Do you have our club card? Do you have our card? No. I have money. I'll give you money and you give me my stuff. Some clerks are nice. They'll swipe their card. Here, I swipe my card for you. Other ones, they insist. I'm going to put an application in for your card. No! I want that card! Every place you got to have a card. Remember when stuff was on sale or not on sale? Now we got to have this card. I travel too many places to have cards for everywhere.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, None Braver Wednesday, February the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have combat radio chatter, patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and we pick up where we left off with None Braver. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
In 1965, Vietnam seemed like just another foreign war, but it wasn't. It was different in many ways, and so were those who did the fighting. In World War II, the average age of the combat soldier was 26. In Vietnam, he was 19. 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 19.
The heaviest fighting of the past 2 weeks continued today, 25 miles northwest of Saigon. I wasn't really sure what was going on. 19. In Vietnam, the combat soldier typically served a 12-month tour of duty, but was exposed to hostile fire almost every day. Military spokesman said today more than 700 enemy troops were killed last week in that sensitive border area. Throughout all of South Vietnam, the enemy lost a total of 2,689 soldiers. Administration study, half of the Vietnam combat veterans suffer from what psychiatrists call post-traumatic stress disorder. Many vets complain of alienation, rage, or guilt. Some succumb to suicidal thoughts. 8 to 10 years after coming home, almost 800,000 men are still fighting the Vietnam War.
Thank you. And now, Combat Radio Chatter.
Number Echo Kilo 3009er, over. MTO, Charlie 2 rounds, HE delay 5 guns, Bravo 1 round, 1 gun, smoke on the deck, CAD, gas TOT 5-3, out.
Torment, this is Hitman. Stand by for amplifying information.
Torment standing by.
TOT 5-3, CAD non-standard -2 to -30, then +30 to +1. Gun target line 09er tree. I'm going to talk you on.
Torment copies all.
West of the 7-3 eastern, there is a large urban sprawl called Contact.
Contact.
Splitting the urban sprawl in half from the north to the south is an MSR. Call Contact.
Contact.
We're observing everything to the west of that MSR. Can you see the palm grove in the northwest quadrant? Call Contact.
Torment, I see 2 prominent palm groves, not sure which one you're calling.
Okay. Do you contact the dump truck heading north in the quadrant?
Torment, contact the dump truck.
In about a minute, that technical will pass through the palm grove. There's a 2-story structure. That's your target. Call Contact.
Torment's contact. Torment 1-2, off safe, 1 away.
Steel Rain, this is Raptor. Adjust fire. Systemated, over.
Raptor, this is Steel Rain. Adjust fire, systemated, out.
10-digit grid. November uniform. 673-12-09-571, over.
10-digit grid, November uniform, 67312-09er 571, out.
5 BMPs in the open. Request splash, over.
5 BMPs in the open, request splash, out. Message to observer, Charlie, 2 rounds, 5 guns in effect, target number Alpha Bravo 1004, over.
Message to observer, Charlie, 2 rounds, 5 guns in effect, target number Alpha Bravo 1004, out.
Shot over.
Shot out.
Splash over.
Splash out. 10-digit impact grid, November uniform, 67214-09-611. Correct and fire for effect, over.
10-digit impact grid, November uniform, 67214-09er 611. Correct and fire for effect, out.
Record as target, end of mission, target suppressed, over.
Record as target, end of mission, target suppressed, out.
Red 5, this is Charlie 902. We are in sector. Gunner up. Scanning with thermals. We have multiple personnel with small arms. Understand we are on restricted ROEs. Over.
Charlie 902, this is Red 5. That is A-firm. Keep a hard posture. Only prosecute targets that are immediate threat, over.
Roger that, Red 5. Hold in position. Stand by for further reports. Charlie 902, out. Steel Rain, this is Assassin. CAD, over.
Assassin, this is Steel Range. CAD, out.
Grid to suppress. Papa Victor, 476-839er. Grid to mark. Papa Victor, 457-837, over.
Grid to suppress, Papa Victor, 476-839. Grid to mark, Papa Victor, 457-837, out. Twisting, this is Dragon 1-5 checking in with you. Flight of 2 A-10s, holding south 5 miles at Angels 10, 1+00 time on station. Loaded with Mark 82s and 1,200 rounds apiece.
Roger, copy all. Are you familiar with our position on the airfield?
Hey, firm. I understand you are south of the control tower. I have multiple vehicles and airstrokes at that location.
That's affirmative. I need you to push 1-5 clicks northwest and check out a potential column of armor.
Dragon 1-5 copies. We're pushing.
Twistin, Suds 2-1 checking in with you. Flight of 2 F-18s holding east 10 miles at Angels 2-2. Orders to follow. 4x GBU-12s, 1 laser Maverick, 600 rounds for the section. 0+35 time on station. Ready for your work.
Twisting copies. Got a flight of 2 A-10s at Angels 10. Call sign Dragon 1-5. They are pushing 1-5 clicks northwest of our position to check out a possible column of armor at that location. Are you familiar with the airfield?
Suds 2-1, that's affirmative.
We are located just south of the control tower with multiple vehicles marked by IR strobes.
And that was the Combat Radio Chatter. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Patriotic Shorts.
Judo, Thai boxing, and jiu-jitsu. Those three are giving you really good leaps and bounds on what you can accomplish. The problem that I saw was that as good as those are, those will actually make a good fighter better, and they'll actually make a combatives guy better at everything that he does and never stop doing them. But they weren't combining the reality of what we were having to face. I was going on target, and I'm like, this is not useful. You're telling me how to do this takedown this way, but I'm not going to apply that in a reality situation. So when I started to seek guys that do combatives really well, my first real experience with like a true combatives instructor was Kelly McCann. And I already started to get open on like actually applying the combatives mindset, where it's like you have multiple opponents, we're in unknown environments, there's hard surfaces, there's weapons, there's all kinds of variables that you cannot control. You're not in a controlled environment, there's no referee, and there's no consent. There's all these things that change a martial arts environment to a combatives environment. And so with those elements missing, I knew that we were burning bad reps, and I also experienced this multiple times.
It was his 5th mission, just days before his 23rd birthday. He was the navigator on a B-17 named Lucky Steely Boy, part of the 447th Bomber Group. He was 2nd Lieutenant Robert Femoyer, and their target that day was an oil refinery near Merseburg, Germany. Heavy flak tore up the B-17, knocking out 2 engines and leaving Femoyer hemorrhaging from severe shrapnel wounds. The pilot asked for a new route home. Unable to sit up on his own, Femoyer insisted on being propped up so he could read his maps and instruments to navigate the plane through flak fields during the perilous journey. They tried to administer morphine to ease his pain, but Femoyer refused. "I need to have a clear mind," he told them through gritted teeth. The pilot managed to guide the plane home, crash landing near the airfield. The crew survived, but Femoyer didn't. He would pass away en route to the hospital. His final words, "They may have gotten me, but I got my boys home." Robert Femoyer was awarded the Medal of Honor.
You'll never think you're alpha again after hearing this story.
I read the book 2008 when it first came out by the coach of Indianapolis Colts. The book is called Quiet Strength, Tony Dungy, okay? I don't know if you know this story or not. He's coaching. The weekend of Super Bowl, he's about to win his first Super Bowl ever, okay? His son dies at 23 years old.
Jesus.
His son dies at 23, 24 years old. There isn't a single person in the world that's expecting this guy to be there on Sunday to coach. If he didn't, what would you and I say? We wouldn't judge him. We're like, dude, what are you talking about? Totally get it. This guy chooses to show up to the game with a smile on his face. He says, because I believe he's in a better place. He's with God right now. I'm at peace. They win the game. I got the chills all over my body. If you want to be the guy of the guys of other guys, you can't go by the standard as everybody else does.
He was just 20 years old and working on the family farm in Iowa when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The strapping young man finished milking the cows, got in his car, and drove 40 miles to enlist in the Army. His name was Blois Bruns, and though he would become a staff sergeant, he was simply known as the Big Swede to the men in his outfit. He was with the 5th Army when it landed south of Salerno, Italy, and fought with distinction at both Anzio and Monte Cassino, 2 of the most difficult campaigns of the war. It's in the mountains near Civitavecchia where he noticed one of his scouts wounded by sniper fire. It was his tent mate, and he's slowly bleeding to death. With German crossfire piercing the air, the Big Swede disobeys a direct order and crawls 300 yards to his friend, puts him on his back, and slowly crawls back to safety. His buddy would survive the war, but sadly the big Swede would be killed by mortar fire a week later. Blois Bruns is buried with his parents in Galva, Iowa.
Why is it that Russian submarines have windows but not the American ones? And how come they don't crack under extreme pressures when submerged? It's not what you think. When American submarines are in transit between their port and their dive point, they move on the surface of the water, during which some personnel are in the open air at the top of the sail of the submarine to help maneuver the sub. But Russian submarines have long transit times, and the harsh weather conditions that they encounter, especially in the Barents Sea, demand the personnel to stay in the enclosed space of the sail, which is why windows are needed. But wouldn't those windows crack under extreme water pressures when the vessel is submerged? And of course they would, if the water pressure was only on the outside. See, the windows are located within the light hull of the submarine, which gets flooded when the submarine submerges. This means that the pressure equalizes on both sides of the windows, so they don't crack. Only what's inside the pressure hull remains dry, and the pressure hull has no windows.
As I circled back around, I felt a big explosion in the back of my F-16. All my warning lights came on. The airplane started tumbling end over end. I could see where the ejection handle was. My hands were thrown up against the top of the canopy, pulling negative G's. I reached down with all the strength I had. I got a hold of the ejection handle. I closed my eyes. I pulled. I was sucked out of the airplane. My parachute opened up, and now I was suspended over a battlefield. Anti-aircraft guns were shooting at me. I could see tracers streaming by my side. I hit the ground pretty hard. I broke both bones in my lower right leg. Iraqi troops were converging on me. I had a .38. I left it in a holster. I decided to surrender. I had to get them to stop shooting at me. When they were 30 yards away, they had fired a surface-to-air missile, and as I looked up, I could see my wingmen flying over. As their guns were trained on me, I grabbed my survival radio and I said, "Break right, flare, flare, flare." My wingman broke right, the missile decoyed behind him, and he escaped.
On January 10, 1942, he stood before a throng of media as he enlisted into the U.S. Army. "We're going to win this war because we're on God's side," he told the assembled press. He was heavyweight champion Joe Louis, and he would spend the next 4 years putting on boxing exhibitions and meeting with the troops to raise morale and money. Louis raised nearly $2 million for the war effort, the most of any athlete or movie star during that time. When asked about his decision to enter the racially segregated U.S. Army, Louis simply replied, "Lots of things wrong with America, but Hitler ain't going to fix them." Serving in the same unit as Jackie Robinson, Sergeant Lewis earned the Legion of Merit for incalculable contributions to the general morale of the military forces. When Joe Louis passed away in 1981, President Ronald Reagan made an exception to the requirements for burial at Arlington to allow Lewis to be interred with full military honors. The champ's stately tombstone remains among the most visited to this day.
What happens when a MiG-25 fires a missile at an SR-71 Blackbird? Well, it happened once during the Cold War as an SR-71 was collecting intelligence over the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea. Just as the crew was passing Vladivostok, home of a MiG-25 interceptor squadron, the RIO suddenly announced they'd been locked onto by an enemy fighter. That could only mean one thing, a MiG-25. Perhaps the only aircraft that stood even a ghost of a chance at shooting down an SR-71. A moment later, the MiG-25 fired a missile, which locked onto the SR-71. For any other aircraft, this would have been bad news. But the SR-71's defensive electronic gear quickly broke the missile's lock. And then, something strange happened. The missile locked onto something else. By this time, the Blackbird was already speeding away at more than 3 times the speed of sound, which means the only thing left to lock onto was the MiG-25 itself. Had the Foxbat been targeted by its own missile? We may never know for sure.
Did you know in the film To Hell and Back, the climactic battle scene depicts the heroic one-man stand that Murphy made against a German attack near the French village of Holzwihr? However, the film does not accurately portray the weather and terrain conditions that Murphy and his men faced on January 26, 1945. According to historical accounts, the battle took place in the midst of a harsh winter with freezing temperatures, heavy snow, mud, and rain. The film, on the other hand, shows a sunny and warm day with clear skies and green fields. This discrepancy was probably due to the practical difficulties and costs of filming in realistic winter conditions. Audie Murphy later said that he wished the film had shown the true conditions of the battle, as it would have given more credit to his fellow soldiers who fought and died there.
Did you know in the film Lord of War, one of the most remarkable aspects of the film is that it used authentic weapons and military equipment, which were provided by actual gun runners who collaborated with the filmmakers. For example, in one scene, Orlov sells a large number of tanks to an African leader. These tanks were real, and they belonged to a Czech arms dealer who had to lend them to the filmmakers for a short time, because he had already agreed to sell them to another country. The filmmakers also had to inform NATO of their plans to film the tank scene in order to avoid any misunderstanding or confusion in case NATO detected the tanks on their satellite images. Another example of the film's realism is that it used a real stockpile of over 3,000 AK-47 rifles. The filmmakers decided to use real guns because it was cheaper and easier than getting fake or prop guns. The filmmakers had to be careful with handling and storing the guns, and they had to hire a special security team to guard them.
Did you know in the film War Hunt, the film contains a glaring mistake in the portrayal of the soldiers' behavior during a night patrol? When the enemy launches a parachute flare, the soldiers do not react as they should have according to their infantry training. Instead of lying down on the ground as quickly as possible to reduce their visibility, they remain standing and expose themselves to the light. Furthermore, they do not follow the protocol of closing one eye to preserve their night vision and tracking the location of the flare with the other eye. This technique would allow them to avoid being dazzled by the bright light and retain their ability to see in the dark after the flare goes out. By keeping both eyes open, they risk losing their night vision for a while and being unable to see anything in the dark.
It's really...
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little motivation.
It doesn't matter how far you might rise. At some point, you are bound to stumble. Because if you're constantly doing what we do, raising the bar, if you're constantly pushing yourself higher, the law of averages that you will at some point fall. And when you do, I want you to know this. Remember this. There is no such thing as failure. Failure is just life trying to move us in another direction. Now, when you're down there in the hole, it looks like failure. And when you're down in the hole, when that moment comes, it's really okay to feel bad for a little while. Give yourself time to mourn what you think you may have lost. But then, here's the key. Learn from every mistake. Because every experience, encounter, and particularly your mistakes are there to teach you and force you into being more of who you are.
I have failed far more times than I've succeeded. Far more. You will never succeed more than you fail. That's not how it works. You know why? Because failure is a wonderful teacher. It's the only way to learn. You have to fail. Failure is a part of the process to becoming successful. I tell people this all the time. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player in the world, he took 946 game-winning shots. 946 times since he was in high school, the ball has been in his hand to take the game-winning shot with no time on the clock. He has only made 146 of those. He has missed over 700 times, but he has made 146. You know what they write about? When you make it. They write about when you make it. So guess what? When you get through failing, all you got to do is make one.
Some of the most successful people in the world are the ones who've had the most failures. J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter. Her first Harry Potter book was rejected 12 times before it was finally published. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. He lost hundreds of games and missed thousands of shots during his career. But he once said, I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed. These people succeeded because they understood that you can't let your failures define you. You have to let your failures teach you. You have to let them show you what to do differently the next time.
I really want everyone to know, especially young people, that the hundreds or thousands of dumb ideas that I've had are what led me to my good ideas. You have to give yourself permission to fail. I try as hard as I can not to fail because it's embarrassing, but I do give myself permission to, and you should too. So go easy on yourselves and just make the right choices that feel right for you.
The most important thing is this: to be able at any moment to sacrifice what you are for what you will become. I don't do well in math. You're right. You ain't never studied. I'm not good in writing because you have never written before. But I dare you to fail in writing for a whole year to see if you can get to the end. I dare you to fail. I dare you to take that same class over and over again. I dare you to stop dropping classes like you saw. Always want to give up. I'm dropping. Why you dropping? You can't get through a writing class and you got tutor after tutor, resource after resource. The problem is you ain't never felt no pain before. You're soft. It's a soft generation. You quit on everything. And so every time something get hard, you quit, you call mama. I dare you to take a little pain.
So when you fail, it's a part of the process. Keep going. You're supposed to fail. Shit, who you know that gets it right all the time? That's impossible. You have to fail.
Failure is a massive part of being able to be successful. You have to get comfortable with failure. You have to actually seek failure. Failure is where all of the lessons are. You know, when you go to the gym and you work out, you're actually seeking failure. You want to take your muscles to the point where you get to failure because that's where the adaptation is. That's where growth is. Successful people fail a lot. They fail a whole lot more than they succeed. They extract the lessons from the failure and they use that and they use the wisdom to come around to the next phase of success. Gotta take a shot. You have to live at the edge of your capabilities. You gotta live where you're almost certain you're gonna fail. It's a reason for practice. Practice is controlled failure. You're getting to your limit, getting to your limit, getting to your limit. You can't lift that. You can't do that until you get to the point that all of a sudden your body makes the adjustment and then you can do it. Failure actually helps you to recognize the areas where you need to evolve. So fail early, fail often, fail forward.
You got to tell yourself, despite the circumstances, the situation, I'm not going anywhere until I get to go. Until I make my dreams become a reality, I'm not quitting. I don't care how much money I have to invest. I don't care how much time I have to invest. I'm going to continue to do this until I become successful. Every single day when I show up and I let failure know, failure is not an option. So you can't even let it sink into your brain, not even a second. You have to know that this thing is going to work. Come hell or high water, whatever it is that I set out to do, it may not happen in 6 months, it may not happen in a year, it may not happen in 2 years, but at some point, my dream is going to become a reality.
Being scared to fail won't do anything. In fact, when you love success and you start going for it, guess what happens? You're gonna fail. You're gonna fail 10 times, 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times. But that's okay. Failure isn't permanent. Falling isn't permanent. You get right back up and keep going. And this time, you're gonna be stronger, wiser, and you'll be more driven than ever. And for every 10 failures, you'll land one success. You have to love success so much that you're willing to fail 10 times before you can succeed once. That's how a winner does it.
When I wake up in the morning, I don't think, am I motivated to go do what I'm supposed to do? No, I don't think about it for 1 millisecond. When the alarm clock goes off, I have no thought about whether this is easy, whether this is hard, whether I want to do it, whether I don't want to do it. None of that matters. It's an emotionless, thoughtless discipline. When the alarm clock goes off, You get up, you get out of bed, and you go do what you're supposed to do. I don't care how it feels.
Every day, I don't feel like doing things that I still do. It's called discipline. It's not about feeling like doing it.
You don't feel like going through that shit on a Wednesday morning when you wake up, but you have to do it because you're disciplined. You're either a disciplined individual or you are not a disciplined individual. I do not need to be motivated. I'm a disciplined person. If I allocate X amount of time to work, I'm going to do it. You're going to have to work when you don't feel like working.
Every fucking day I wake up and I don't want to do some shit. You have to learn how to get up and do shit when you ain't got no fucking 5K, no 10K. Nothing exists. Your life fucking sucks. You're in the fucking dungeon. But guess what? I'm still going to get it.
Your feelings don't matter. That's the deal. You may feel like doing something, maybe you don't feel like doing something. Doesn't matter. Get out there and do what you're supposed to do, whether you feel like it or not.
You have to learn to perform without motivation.
Motivation is a feeling that comes and goes, and it doesn't matter whether it's there or not. Discipline is infinitely more important. So no matter how you feel, get up and do what you're supposed to do.
It's a commitment. It's not a feeling. Commitments don't have nothing to do with your feelings. You do it because you're supposed to.
It's a lifestyle. Instead of hitting that snooze button in the fucking morning and not making your bed and not cleaning your house, you don't hit the snooze button. You get up. You don't want to go run, you go run. You don't want to make your bed, you make your bed. You don't want to study, you fucking study. That's how you start to callous your mind. It's going to suck. It's not going to be fun. Do something that sucks every single day of your life. That's how you grow. You have to learn to perform without purpose. You have to learn to perform a lot of different things. And that's what people think. They think I need to have this motivation to work out, to study, to be better. So if they don't have it, they just don't fucking do it. And that's where you fail. You have to learn to train your mind well beyond motivation. It's so easy to be great nowadays, my friend, because most people are weak. Most people don't want to go that extra mile. Most people don't want to find that extra because it sucks. It's miserable. It's lonely.
I don't care how good you are in anything. You don't have discipline, you ain't nobody. Nothing. Discipline. Because you give up on the slightest struggle without discipline. I mean, discipline is doing what you hate to do, but do it like you love it.
You have to be willing to grit it out. You have to be willing to push through discomfort. Nothing that you're about to try or do that is worthwhile is going to be comfortable for you during the process of creating it. Stop with this hope, stop with this I wish, and start replacing those terms with I will fucking do, no matter what.
Let me explain something to you, people. When you show up late, when you are out of shape and your job requires you to be in shape, when you are not working as hard as you know you can work on the job, when you are giving people attitude because they're giving you an attitude, it's like a cycle of death. It ain't gonna stop. If your goal is to work your way up the success ladder, if you're gonna have a problem with everybody who has a problem with you, do you think that that's gonna help you to get to the top even faster? You know how many times I gotta laugh at shit that ain't funny? You know how many times I gotta go to dinners and events and places and be around people that I don't fuck with at all? But guess what? If it's a game of survival, we gonna get from where we are to where we trying to be. Your pride and your ego is out of fucking control. Your pride and your ego has been killing your career growth. Your pride and your ego and your attitude has compromised the altitude of your career. You know better, but you're deciding to not do better. You are a lazy, unprofessional, mean attitude having motherfucker. And yet, when things are not happening good for you, when things are not coming your way, when things are not happening as fast as you want them to happen, you blame everybody else and what they're doing and saying, and you completely disown everything that you're doing to contribute to your career not going to another level. I refuse to be aware of something I could be and should be doing better and purposely decide to not do it. I refuse. That's just like inviting broke into your life. Your pride and your ego has stopped you from being thirsty. You're in your own way. You are the reason your career is not on the next level. Nobody else but you. You know better, but the question is, are you willing to do better?
Stop running around acting as if you don't have a choice.
You do have a choice. You do have a choice. You decided that those are your friends. You decided that those are the people that you want to spend time with. You decided this is what you wanted to do with your day. Stop running around acting as if you have nothing to do with the people, things, and situations in your life. Feeling good isn't just an opportunity. Feeling good is a responsibility that we all have for ourselves.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Law for February 21st.
February 21st. Create the need for you. Make people depend on you. More is to be gained from such dependence than courtesy. He who has slaked his thirst immediately turns his back on the well, no longer needing it. Balthasar Gracian. Many of the great condottieri of Renaissance Italy suffered the same fate. They won battle after battle for their employers, only to find themselves banished, imprisoned, or executed. The problem was not ingratitude. It was that there were so many other condottieri as able and valiant as they were. They were replaceable. Nothing was lost by killing them. Meanwhile, the older among them had grown powerful themselves and wanted more and more money for their services. How much better, then, to do away with them and hire a younger, cheaper mercenary? Such is the fate, to a less violent degree one hopes, of those who do not make others dependent on them. Sooner or later, someone comes along who can do the job as well as they can. Someone younger, fresher, less expensive, less threatening. Necessity rules the world. People rarely act unless compelled to. If you create no need for yourself, then you will be done away with at the first opportunity. Daily Law. Strive to be the only one who can do what you do, and make the fate of those who hire you so entwined with yours that they cannot possibly get rid of you. The 48 Laws of Power. Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you.
And that was the Daily Law for February the 21st from the Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
There is no guru, teacher, founder, nobody who's as strange and relentless as Jesus. And therefore, the religion attached to Jesus is the strangest of them all. Jesus says, whoever loves father or mother more than me, son or daughter more than me, is not worthy of me. The Buddha would not say this. Muhammad wouldn't say this. Moses wouldn't say this. Confucius wouldn't say this. Aristotle wouldn't say it. Plato wouldn't say it. I don't know anybody in the philosophical or religious tradition who would say such a strange thing. But Jesus says it. Your love for me personally has to go beyond the most intense loves of your life. Now, you see the point I'm making, everybody, and why I speak of the strangeness of Christianity. He wouldn't say this unless he himself in person were the very highest good. That's what's at stake in Christianity.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, intellectual honesty consists in taking ideas seriously. To take ideas seriously means that you intend to live by, to practice any idea you accept as true, unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up where we left off on the 33 strategies of war.
Interpretation. In any conflict, it is often the weaker side that in fact controls the dynamic. In this case, the South was in control in both the strategic and the grand strategic sense. In their immediate local strategy, the Confederates had entrenched themselves in powerful defensive positions in Georgia and Virginia. The temptation for the North was to fight on the enemy's terms, to hurl division after division against these positions at tremendous loss of life and with little chance of advancing. In the South's grand strategy, the longer this stalemate prevailed, the more likely Lincoln was to be thrown out of office. Then the war would end through negotiation. The South set the tempo for the battle, slow and grinding, and controlled the stakes. As Sherman saw it, his goal was not to capture a city or to defeat the Confederates in battle. In his view, the only way to win the war was to regain control of the dynamic. Instead of brutal frontal attacks against Dalton or Atlanta, which would play into the South's hands, he operated indirectly. He frightened the timid Johnston into abandoning his stronghold and goaded the rash Hood into senseless attacks, in both instances playing upon the psychology of the opponent to force the issue. By constantly putting his enemy on the horns of a dilemma, where both staying put and moving were equally dangerous, he took control of the situation without having to waste men in battle. Most important, by demonstrating to the South with his destructive march that the longer the war dragged on, the worse it would be for them, he regained grand strategic control of the war. For the Confederates, to keep fighting was slow suicide. The worst dynamic in war and in life is the stalemate. It seems that whatever you do only feeds the stagnation. Once this happens, a kind of mental paralysis overcomes you. You lose the ability to think or respond in different ways. At such a point, all is lost. If you find yourself falling into such a dynamic, dealing with a defensive, entrenched opponent, or trapped in a reactive relationship, you must become as creative as General Sherman. Deliberately shake up the pace of the slow waltz by doing something seemingly irrational. Operate outside the experience of the enemy, as Sherman did when he cut himself loose from his supplies. Move fast here and slow there. One major jolt given to the stale dynamic will shake it up, force the enemy to do something different. With the slightest change, you have room for greater change and taking control. Injecting novelty and mobility is often enough to unbalance the minds of your rigid and defensive opponents. 4. In 1833, Mr. Thomas Auld, the slaveholding owner of a plantation on Maryland's eastern shore, summoned back his slave Frederick Douglass, 15 years old at the time, from Baltimore, where Douglass had just spent 7 years serving Auld's brother. Now he was needed to work the fields of the plantation. But life in the city had changed Douglass in many ways, and to his chagrin, he found it quite hard to disguise this from Auld. In Baltimore, he had secretly managed to teach himself how to read and write, something no slave was allowed to do, for that would stimulate dangerous thoughts. On the plantation, Douglass tried to teach as many slaves as possible to read. These efforts were quickly squashed. But what was worse for him was that he had developed a rather defiant attitude, what the slaveholder called impudence. He talked back to Auld, questioned some of his orders, and played all kinds of tricks to get more food. Auld was notorious for keeping his slaves near starvation. One day, Auld informed Douglass
that he was hiring him out for a year to Mr. Edward Covey, a nearby farm renter who had earned a reputation as a consummate breaker of young Negroes. Slaveholders would send them their most difficult slaves, and in exchange for their free labor, Covey would beat every last ounce of rebellion out of them. Covey worked Douglas especially hard, and after a few months he was broken in body and spirit. He no longer desired to read books or engage in discussions with his fellow slaves. On his days off, he would crawl under the shade of a tree and sleep off his exhaustion and despair. One especially hot day in August 1834, Douglas became ill and fainted. The next thing he knew, Covey was hovering over him, hickory slab in hand, ordering him back to work. But Douglas was too weak. Covey hit him on the head, opening a deep wound. He kicked him a few times, but Douglas could not move. Covey finally left, intending to deal with him later. Douglas managed to get to his feet, staggered to the woods, and somehow made his way back to Auld's plantation. There he begged with Master Auld to keep him there, explaining Covey's cruelty. Auld was unmoved. Douglas could spend the night, but then he must return to Covey's farm. Making his way back to the farm, Douglas feared the worst. He told himself that he would do his best to obey Covey and somehow survive the weeks ahead. Arriving at the stables where he was supposed to work that day, he began his chores, when out of nowhere, like a snake, Covey slithered in, rope in hand. He lunged at Douglas, trying to get a slip knot on his leg and tie him up. He was clearly intending the thrashing to end all thrashings. Risking an even more intense beating, Douglas pushed Covey away, and without hitting him, kept him from getting the rope around his leg. At that moment, something clicked in Douglas's head. Every defiant thought that had been suffocated by his months of brutal labor came back to him. He was not afraid. Covey could kill him, but it was better to go down fighting for his life. Suddenly, a cousin came to Covey's aid, and finding himself surrounded, Douglas did the unthinkable. He swung hard at the man and knocked him to the ground. Hitting a white man would most likely lead to his hanging. A fighting madness came over Douglas. He returned Covey's blows. The struggle went on for 2 hours, until, bloodied, exhausted, and gasping for breath, Covey gave up and slowly staggered back to his house. Douglas could only assume that Covey would now come after him with a gun or find some other way to kill him. It never happened. Slowly it dawned on Douglas. To kill him, or punish him in some powerful way, posed too great a risk. Word would get out that Covey had failed to break a Negro this one time, had to resort to a gun when his terror tactics did not work. The mere hint of that would ruin his reputation far and wide, and his job depended on his perfect reputation. Better to leave the wild 16-year-old slave alone than risk the kind of crazy or unpredictable response Douglas had shown himself capable of. Better to let him calm down and go quietly away when his time of service there was over. For the rest of Douglas's stay with Covey, the white man did not lay a hand on him. Douglas had noticed that slaveholders often prefer to whip those who are most easily whipped. Now he had learned the lesson for himself. Never again would he be submissive. Such weakness only encouraged the tyrants to go further. He would rather risk death, returning blow for blow with his fists or his wits. Interpretation. Reflecting on this moment years later in his book, My Bondage and My Freedom, after he had escaped to the North and become a leading advocate of the abolitionist movement, Douglas wrote, "This battle with Mr. Covey was the turning point in my life as a slave. I was a changed being after that fight. I had reached the point at which I was not afraid to die. This spirit made me a free man in fact, while I remained a slave in form." For the rest of his life, he adopted this fighting stance. By being unafraid of the consequences, Douglas gained a degree of control of his situation both physically and psychologically. Once he had rooted fear out of himself, he opened up possibilities for action. sometimes fighting back overtly, sometimes being clever and deceitful. From a slave with no control, he became a man with some options and some power, all of which he leveraged into real freedom when the time came. To control the dynamic, you must be able to control yourself and your emotions.
And that was the next part of Chapter 15, Control the Dynamic, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you should be voting Republican. And if you're a Democrat woman, because we are the party of women. We're the party of strong women. We know that abortion does not empower women. As a matter of fact, it empowers men. Men are the beneficiaries of abortions, not women. So remember, if you're a Democrat woman, you need to vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. So don't take no for an answer. Whenever you hear somebody or read, maybe there's a book that is titled Don't Take No for an Answer, or How Not to Take No for an Answer, that's socialism. That's a person that is the author is trying to get you into the power mode. Always take no for an answer. What you don't want, what they mean to say maybe, is don't take maybe for an answer. Somebody tells you maybe, and there's various different ways of telling you maybe. That's fine. You want to pursue somebody or something when you're getting a maybe from them, that's perfectly legit. But when they get to the point that they say, no, I'm not interested, that's the time to say, okay, well, have a nice day, and walk away. If you don't, then you're really nothing more than a psychological rapist and a socialist to boot. And that's what the socialists do. The socialists convince everybody not to take no for an answer because they're interested in their petty little revolution and their non-existent socialist paradise. So remember, don't take maybe for an answer, but do take no for an answer. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the first half of Chapter 2 from the book None Braver.
Chapter 2. J-Damned. December 5th, 2001. Senior Master Sergeant Patrick Malone was living in shit. Well, perhaps not exactly in shit, but definitely surrounded by it. And since he wasn't alone, he didn't take it personally. Alone would have actually been an improvement. He was sharing the inside of a spacious, mosquito and exotic bug-infested hangar on the Pakistani Air Force's Shahbaz Air Base with a couple of hundred American Special Operations types. Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces and Rangers, Malone's unit of Air Force pararescuemen, Marine security guards, and the Army, Air Force, and Marine aviators whose job it was to get them where they were needed. For the Americans, the hangar on the base at Jacobabad, Pakistan, was the only secure building there. They slept, worked, ate, and in their off hours watched DVDs in it. They also used its woefully inadequate toilet facilities and suffered the consequences when the effluent came bubbling up in a lagoon of excrement, sort of a moat of crap across the eastern end of the building. In the morning, when the sun was shining and the air was relatively clear, kinder souls referred to it as Lake Jacobabad. But as the heat of the day built up and the men and women who worked nights began to wake up and use the facilities, the name given it by some of the world travelers within the building seemed more appropriate. They called it Lake Shitty-Caca. Eventually, the U.S. Air Force civil engineers would bring in canvas portable toilet and shower units, ultimately upgrading them to what the troops called Cadillac showers. Could orders to shave regularly and wear uniforms properly be far behind? What wouldn't change was the water supply. There was never enough to permit more than Navy-type showers, and the warnings of its non-potability were everywhere.
While an army may move on its stomach, this Air Force-run base was lubricated with plane loads of cases of bottled water, most of it brought in from Saudi Arabia, which, as everyone knows, is a desert. Go figure. Malone recalls that in those early days, just coming in contact with the local water supply was enough to cause guys to break out in rashes. Whoever coined that phrase about war not being healthy for children and other living things wasn't only talking about the consequences of gunfire. While the rashes may not kill you, or worse, take you off of flying status, the Air Force calls it going DNIF for duties not including flying. Mosquito-borne malaria remained a constant concern, and they conscientiously used mosquito netting around their cots. Adding to J-Bad's reputation as an airman's R&R paradise was the local fauna. One soldier patrolling the perimeter had already been bitten by a cobra and was lucky to be alive. The venom stopped the man's heart. There were warnings posted everywhere to avoid contact with the monitor lizards wandering the base, occasionally even inside buildings. One bite from these 2 to 5 foot long creatures is enough to cause a fatal infection. And then there are the nighttime visitors, like the jackals that provide a serenade that's really annoying to anyone actually trying to do something outlandish, like sleep when it's dark out. The security forces took to organizing jackal hunts on a regular basis. Malone had been accompanied on the journey to Jacobabad from the headquarters of the 123rd Special Tactics Squadron of the Kentucky Air National Guard in Louisville by another PJ, Technical Sergeant Ryan Schultz. They were sent to replace 2 pararescuemen who had to go home on emergency leave. The duo got word on October 29, 2001. Schultz was federalized and mobilized, and in less than 24 hours, both were on their way, doing the PJ bag drag to Baltimore, where they boarded the Rotator, the sardine can impersonating a DC-10 that the Defense Department charters from commercial airlines to deliver individual replacement troops overseas. That would take 30 hours to get them to Oman, stopping along the way to pick up and drop off individuals and small units. Each of them had at least a dozen bags with equipment that would make it possible for them to climb a mountain, dive in an ocean, or tackle just about any environment in between. Paying exorbitant excess baggage charges, reimbursable, is a way of life for traveling PJs. It took them 2 days in Oman before they could hop a flight on a C-17 cargo plane bound for J-Bad, and it was on that flight that they found themselves in war. It was hilarious in a kind of weird way, recalls Malone. When are you really in a war? 'Cause you're not in war in Oman. You're not in war in Baltimore. You know you're in a state of war, but when are you truly in a war? He asks. Well, when we landed in Jacobabad, we were in a war. The crew of the C-17 was brand new in theater, spooled up and nerved up, according to Malone. They knew that the locals were taking pot shots with rifles at incoming aircraft and feared that someone might try it with a shoulder-fired missile or a rocket-propelled grenade. They also knew that Air Force combat controllers were handling airfield operations, and the pilots had been told that there were guns going off outside the gate and snipers on rooftops watching. Remember, in this war, Pakistan is theoretically our ally. Because of the threat, all operations into J-Bad took place at night, and the aircraft were blacked out. The theory was that they could be heard but not seen, and by the time a bad guy fired at the sound, the plane would be long gone. Inside the cavernous plane, you're strapped in and helpless as the pilots fly a tactical approach to the field. That means it's not a predictable, straight-in shot, but a sequence of sudden left and right turns that makes the ride reminiscent of Disneyland's Space Mountain, a roller coaster in the dark. As a passenger, you sit there in blacked-out conditions, hanging on, knowing that sooner or later you'll hit the ground. It could be 10 seconds or 10 minutes. When Malone and Schultz made their first landing at J-Bad, it was, as the air crews are wont to say, a bit sporty. We're going in. Boom! Chaffs and flares firing. Malone acknowledges that firing flares does tend to reveal the position of the aircraft, and they offer no protection against anything other than heat-seeking missiles. It was, he says, inexperience of some of the younger pilots getting used to it. As time went on, those guys were whipping in and out of those runways. They learned the gig quick, and they adapted and overcame. The local indigenous population of 200,000, most of them Muslim, was not especially thrilled to have Americans in their midst. In addition to the now de rigueur custom of burning the stars and stripes to express their displeasure shortly after Americans arrived at the base, at least one person had been shot and killed protesting the Pakistani government's leasing more than half of their third largest airbase to the United States. Massed attacks on the facility were not a concern, according to one Air Force officer expressing an unofficial opinion, only because the locals were split into 20 or so political parties. From the control tower, their flags could be seen flying in the city that couldn't agree on anything. Nevertheless, off-base excursions by American troops were forbidden, a precaution proved sensible less than 3 months later when Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl was kidnapped and murdered in Karachi. As time went by, security at Jabad was expanded beyond the immediate area of the hangar, and either the locals stopped shooting over the fence every night or the Americans just got used to it. Since no one had been hit, it was deemed more an annoyance than a threat. Ultimately, Army infantrymen and women from the 10th Mountain Division relieved the Marines pulling security. The grunts assumed the unenviable task of climbing into sandbagged bunkers on top of hardened aircraft shelters, pass, and along the perimeter every night to remain vigilant behind 50 caliber machine guns in near freezing temperatures while under relentless attack by a strain of mosquitoes that hadn't gotten the word about cold weather making them sluggish. Early in Operation Enduring Freedom, American authorities had divided areas of responsibility at the 34th parallel, which essentially sliced across Afghanistan at the southern edge of Kabul. All rescue and refueling activities north of the line were flown out of K2, the former Soviet airfield at Karshi-Khanabad, Uzbekistan, and everything south of the 34th was the responsibility of units based at Jabad. No tanker aircraft were based in Afghanistan itself. The huge field at Bagram, with its 10,000-foot runway, was overtaxed with helicopter and cargo plane activity, and the presence of millions of landmines and pieces of unexploded ordnance just off the tarmac made tanker operations there especially dicey. What's more, unlike the airfields at K2 and Jabad, Bagram was subjected to intermittent rocket attacks. Using the place as a storage dump for hundreds of thousands of gallons of jet fuel was probably not a good idea. The CSAR mission was assigned to the Special Tactics Squadrons of AFSOC. They had their own MH-53 Payflow helicopters, 88-foot-long behemoths that are the largest rotary-wing aircraft in the Air Force inventory, and the special tactics teams that included PJs and combat controllers and were trained in commando operations. They also had their own refuelers, the MC-130P Combat Shadow version of the C-130. It was just coincidence that the NCO in charge of the operation in Jabad, Senior Master Sergeant Pat Malone, and the NCO in charge at K2, Technical Sergeant Kiri Miller, were both from the Guard unit at Louisville. On December 5th, the Division of Labor for PJs in Operation Enduring Freedom got a bit more complicated. It happened with the entry of the Air Force's Air Combat Command, ACC, Combat Search and Rescue units into the war. ACC CSAR units, such as the 347th Rescue Wing out of Moody Air Force Base, Georgia, flew HC-130 refueling planes and HH-60G Pavehawk helicopters and carried PJs on both airframes. Their assignment was traditional CSAR. If a plane went down, it was their mission. The AFSOC PJs were now assigned solely to missions that were related to special operations, primarily infiltrating and exfiltrating ground teams for purposes of reconnaissance or combat. The PJ's purpose in this configuration was to provide a rescue force that would already be on scene if needed. In the South, the plan worked well after Malone used his rank and 20 years of rescue experience to keep his guys flying, when others were arguing that they could be eliminated from helicopter missions. Because of the altitudes that flights were going in on, and sometimes the equipment that was being carried in or personnel being carried in or out, weight limitations were becoming a concern. We were starting to run into what can we do without? In order to make a mission successful, what can we do without? Because PJs and AFSOC were not considered part of the flight crews, as opposed to ACC, where PJs are as integral to the mission as a loadmaster might be, Malone feels it was relatively easy for the commanders to say, okay, we'll cut the PJs, cut the rescue team off. That's where he was able to speak to the flying commanders and say, "Colonels, let's look at the bigger picture here. You have a job to do within the job, whatever your mission is for the night, but you also have a rescue force to provide. If you start dropping your PJs or their equipment, then you're not providing the service you should be providing." The Air Force officers who were running the show in the South understood Malone's argument. But up north, where Kiri Miller was dealing with an Army-run operation, there were problems trying to keep PJs on aircraft. Malone says of the younger pararescuemen, he had a fight. The Army didn't understand that. Army aviation didn't always understand that. They're Army. They have their missions, haul Army guys around, and do Army stuff. Rescue? Where does that register in this game? The answer was it didn't. Malone says Miller was told to sit on the sidelines while the Army flew their mission. If something happened, they'd come back and get the PJs. Well, in that "I'll come back and get you," a lot of people can die. A lot of bad stuff can happen. It's a battle that the PJs up north continued to fight, and as would be demonstrated a couple of months later, Malone's words were prophetic. December 5th, 2001 dawned clear and sunny. This was to be ACC's first day standing up, pulling CSAR alert for the theater. Since they were short-handed, Malone was planning on filling in as a jumpmaster team leader on their Herc crew. He briefed the team and then joined them on the taxiway, checking out the alert aircraft. It was around 10 a.m. local time while he was on the plane that Ryan Schultz came out to get him. "Hey, got something going on. You need to come back and start coordinating." The original call was mortar fire with 3 injured. Then it quickly jumped to 7 or 8 injured. Not knowing the details, Malone opted to plan big, especially once the decision was made to get the survivors in daylight, which he says was thinking way outside the box. "I wanted to beef the crews up, rescue guys-wise, PJs-wise, because I had a funny feeling you just never know. I'd been on enough missions where 1 is 20 or 1 is 50, and it's not 8. If you get out there and it is truly 7, no big deal. We got extra PJs, we can really tend to their needs." 2 of his crews had flown the night before till 3 or 4 in the morning and were still in the mandatory 12-hour crew rest. Ryan would fly as team leader on one of the MH-53 helicopters. Malone would fill in, joining him as a team leader, along with 2 more pararescuemen, Staff Sergeants Ryan Hall and Ken Curtis, and CCT Jason Brooks. 2 PJs were assigned to the other helicopter, along with an Army doctor and 1 Army medic. Malone acknowledges that everybody's pucker factor was pretty high. First daylight combat search and rescue mission for the South with a firefight within half a click. This was going to be no ordinary mission. Just before taking off, Schultz throws an extra accessory kit on his helicopter. It's got extra medical supplies, bandages, IVs, extra oxygen containers. They also toss on extra litters. The latest report had 3 dead, 8 injured. Malone's idea of planning for the worst is beginning to make sense. The flight is going to take about 2.5 hours. Their destination is near the village of Shawali Kaut, about 21 miles north of Kandahar. It is hotly contested territory, with the forces of then-warlord Hamid Karzai moving down from the north, accompanied by an American Special Forces team, and the forces of Gul Agha Sherzai, having crossed into southern Afghanistan from Pakistan, moving up from the south. The object of both leaders is to assault and capture Kandahar, the Taliban stronghold of Mullah Omar. Halfway to their objective, the PJs get another update. 18 injured and 3 dead. An hour later, another update. It's now up to 25 injured, and word comes that it wasn't a mortar attack. It was friendly fire, or what they now call blue-on-blue, or even fratricide. Pat and Ryan hear the latest report on the radio and look at each other, eyebrows raised. This is going to be a mission to be remembered. To get ready, Schultz sits down on the floor and eats a cold cheese tortellini MRE. What neither Schultz nor Malone could know at that point is that there may be as many as 50 or 60 wounded and close to 30 dead, among them 3 American Special Forces soldiers. They'd been hit by one of our own 2,000-pound bombs, outfitted with a Joint Direct Attack Munition, JDAM, guidance tail kit. It converts a dumb gravity bomb into what manufacturer Boeing, the Air Force, and the Navy call accurate, adverse weather-smart munitions. The $20,000 kit puts a new tail section on the 2,000-pound BLU-109 Mark 84 warhead. It contains an inertial navigation system and a global positioning system guidance control unit. Once released from the aircraft, the JDAM autonomously navigates to the designated target coordinates that were either loaded into the JDAM's guidance unit before takeoff or manually altered by the aircrew before the weapon is released. When GPS data is available, the bomb will nearly always hit within 40 feet of its target, even when released from a B-52 flying at 45,000 feet up to 15 miles away. In 1996, after testing demonstrated the weapon performed as advertised by Boeing, the U.S. Air Force ordered 62,000 and the Navy another 25,496 JDAM bomb kits. So what had happened? According to Lieutenant Colonel David Fox, the U.S. Special Forces Battalion commander whose mission included advising Hamid Karzai as he negotiated with the Taliban for the surrender of Kandahar, his units had been taking intermittent fire from across a nearby bridge over the Arghandab River. At about 9 in the morning, they spotted a cave entrance about 2.5 kilometers to their south. Air Force controllers brought in a flight of F-18s, and once the controllers put lasers on the target, the jets dropped laser-guided munitions. Fox says he watched 2 munitions fall a little short of the cave entrance, and it didn't look like much damage had been caused. The controllers, in the meantime, were talking to a B-52 overhead about dropping the JDAM. About 9:30 in the morning, as Lieutenant Colonel Fox reached down to grab his binoculars, he was knocked to the ground. I can't figure out exactly what had happened. I look around, and once I see the devastation, I knew that we had been hit by a very large munition. Initially, he thought it was enemy artillery, but there was no such artillery reported in the south. It took about 3 or 4 hours before it was officially determined that they'd been hit by friendly fire. The 2,000-pound JDAM had fallen approximately 2 kilometers short of its intended target and had impacted directly on the Special Forces position. Karzai suffered a minor face wound, either from shrapnel or a piece of glass from blown-out windows. An Afghan fighter standing near the soon-to-be head of government was decapitated. None of this information, of course, is conveyed to the 2 inbound helicopters, rocketing toward the area as low as 25 feet above the ground. The only advantage they have going into an unknown situation is that before departing Jabad, they found a soldier who had actually been exfilled from the area the night before and brought him with them. The hope is that his familiarity with the ground situation will keep them from becoming an easy target for enemy fighters armed with RPGs. As the pair of Pavlos approach the objective, their impromptu advisor says to Malone, "Hey, whatever you do, don't let them fly over the river. That's right where the firefight is."
And that was the first half of Chapter 2 from the book None Braver by Michael Hirsch. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.